Following the Golden Rule with Andrew Faas is proudly supported by Remax St. Andrews. Live and vacation by the sea. Choose wisely. Choose Remax.
Hello, my name is Andrew Faas. Welcome to Following the Golden Rule.
And I'm Jay Remer, your co-host. Over the next few months, Andy and I will be discussing the ABCs of building character. This is not so much a philosophical discussion as a chance to talk about action steps necessary to effect a real reformation. This will require you to take some time for self-reflection. Think about each of the characteristics of leadership we put forward and how they relate to you as an individual. We believe that everyone should be a leader of character. Hopefully, this series will reinforce this belief. We invite your questions and comments, which you can leave on our Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn pages, where these programs will be reposted. And for today's program, we're going to be talking about D is for dependable. I'm curious as to how you picked dependable. I went through a number of D's, and as I'm sure you did, diplomatic, decent, dynamic, driven. How is it that you came to land on dependable as the most important characteristic in this particular letter, if not the whole alphabet?
Well, for all of them, I had to choose amongst a number of characteristics. So they were important to me for one specific reason, is that they are tangible in nature. And other characteristics are they're good to have and essential to have. And I'm sure that people will evaluate it a little different than I have. The good thing is most of these characteristics overlap one another, and there's a thread of consistency in terms of a leader of character. Mm-hmm. So again, when I look at something like being decent, of course you want people to be decent. And I compare that to being dependable. We have to count on people to be dependable, mm-hmm. Whereas they may not always be decent, which is okay. But for me, somebody who I cannot count on to be dependable, it's not okay. Mm-hmm. And it gets to, all of these characteristics that, doesn't matter. Does being dependable matter?
Yeah. And
it matters to me, and this is where we challenge the audience to say, think it through. Yeah. And is it important for you to be dependable? Mm-hmm. And is it important for people, for you to consider people dependable? Mm-hmm.
Well, I can remember going through this myself because I was thinking, now how dependable can I be? Because when I read the article over again that you wrote for Money Inc., it was interesting that dependable seems like a simple enough word. You have an agreement with somebody, they're going to do something at a certain time, and in a certain way, to the best of their ability, and that's that. And you can count on that. But the word itself seems to be more complex. And as I was going through my own life, how dependable am I?
Dependable is dependable. Can you count on people to do what they promise to do? Mm-hmm. Can people count on you to help them when they need help? Mm-hmm. And it is as simple as that. Now, it is going to become more and more important as time goes on. And over the last period of time, because of coronavirus, people have been put in positions where they needed to be counted on. to work, in essence, without supervision. And my guess is that that's going to be the wave of the future. So there will be less of a need for people to be micromanaged or microcontrolled or micromanaged, because they are operating pretty much in isolation, but yet still be part of a overall team. And what in essence organizations are doing is giving people more autonomy. And the deal is you're going to be given more autonomy, but as an employer, I need to depend on you to do what needs to be done. And dependability is part of a value exchange proposition. And we're all interrelated, and we're all interdependent, and we all need people to help each other. Let's just define culture for a minute.
Good.
Culture is defined by the relationship units or organizations have with their various stakeholders. So then relationships are defined by the value exchange propositions that units or organizations have with their stakeholders. So starting as a child, the value proposition with your parents is they will feed you, they will shelter you, and they will nurture you. In exchange for that, you follow the rules. Here are the rules, and you abide by them, and we will continue to feed, nurture, and house you. So this goes to the teacher in terms of, I'm going to teach you how to teach. Now the expectation I have of you is you do your homework and be prepared, and so on relative to the person you work for, the people that work for you, the relationship you have outside of the work environment, and so all of these relationships are value exchange propositions. And the key value proposition that I've always expected is people take the responsibility and do what they promise to do. And so.
Well, I think it's interesting because especially in today, where we have so many bystanders, it's very important to become more engaged. And as you step out of the shadows and start to experience life a little bit more tangibly, you do depend on other people, and you realize how other people depend on you, and it evokes a different feeling in you. And I think that that's where we need people to go in order to really get a grip on being dependable and being part of this movement of to reform society to become more collaborative and less command and control. Do you agree with that?
I'm not sure. I try to cut it to the chase.
Yes.
And the best way you can get people to think about being dependable is holding them accountable when they're not. You promised to do something, you didn't do it, and here's the consequence. And it's even more important because a lot of promises are being made today. And if we look at the political arena, promises to do things because of the civil unrest that we have, and a lot of these promises are still rhetoric. Let me read something to you. It's only recently, a prominent public man was criticized throughout the newspaper world for not having enough character to keep his promises. He had not the stamina to make good when to do so proved difficult. He hadn't the timber, the character fiber to stand up to and do the thing he knew what was right and that he had promised to do. The world is full of these jellyfish people who do not have the lime enough in their backbone to stand erect to do the right thing. They are always stepping into the spotlight in the good intention stage, and then when the reckoning comes, taking the line of least resistance, doing the thing which casts the least effect on money, regardless of later consequences. They think they can be as unscrupulous about breaking promises as they were about making them. But sooner or later, fate makes us play fair or get out of the game. Now that was written 100 years ago by a guy named Marston. 100 years ago. So describes what is occurring today.
Yes. So on the idea that you mentioned in there about the being undependable, are we in danger of that becoming normalized? Because we see it so frequently, and along with many other things that unfortunately are being normalized, are we in danger of that? Are we in it?
Well, from my perspective and from everybody else's perspective, we are in it. The only thing we can depend on is people not being dependable.
Yes.
And you mentioned a bit earlier about where you did self-reflection and you said you let people down. And again, with any of these characteristics, like not being courageous, you don't want to call a person a coward. And you have to sift through and, I guess, pick your battles in terms of where you hold accountabilities. And so often you hear, well, this person, he or she's always late. And that is something that most people don't like.
No.
But they put up with it.
They can depend on it after a while.
Well, they depend on it.
Sadly.
But what's more important? And I call people out when they're not late, because it bugs me to the point that, you know, if we're going to have a relationship and it's a little thing, I know, but you got to respect my time as well as yours. But at the same time, if I can count on that person for support and help when I need it,
right,
I may overlook that, what I would label as a quirk. And so I think, you know, through all of this, you know, we have to, you know, define, you know, really who can we count on for the important things in life. And
well, I think on the international stage, you know, reflecting back, I grew up in the United States, and the United States was always, you know, sort of a superpower that people, foreign allies, could depend on for certain things, and it's been proven throughout our history that that has been a way of going. It does not seem to be going in that direction at the moment. And I worry that, you know, the balance of world power could change in a very destructive way if we don't kind of come to grips with this. And I'm wondering how we can translate that onto an individual level, because we are going to have to act as individuals at some point, right?
well, as with every characteristic, and yes, I definitely promote the whole concept of collaborative, united front. The United States has already lost its position as a credible, dependable world power, and it's going to take a long time for that to regain. And it starts at the individual level in terms of holding people accountable for not delivering on their promises. And we've allowed that to happen. And so I think it's something that when we go to elect our leaders, or those who represent us at every level, and base our decisions whether or not they're going to deliver on their promises, and not because they're a nice person who is what's the D word that we rejected?
Decent.
Decent. I think we should look at it in terms of can we count on them to represent us and deliver on the promises they made to us, and count on us to properly represent our interests. And that's all about being dependent.
Well, I think it also, it brings me to the idea of how would you feel how do you feel when people are not dependable? And it goes back to the golden rule, is you don't feel very good about it. And so I think that this ethic of reciprocity, which is the golden rule, is highlighted in this whole dependability thing, especially in today's climate.
Well, I word a little bit differently. For me, it pisses me off. And a few years ago, somebody approached me at the Pearson Airport. I was heading off somewhere, and I didn't know this person from Adam, and he said, did you remember me? And I said, well, to be honest with you, no. And then he said, he reminded me about an incident where he worked for one of the companies that I was responsible for. And he said, you used the two most powerful words that I've ever heard. And I've tried to follow that throughout my career. And I said, well, remind me. And he relayed an incident where people did not deliver on, a group did not deliver on a promise. And he said, you just sat there quietly and then said, I'm disappointed.
Yeah.
And he said, that stuck through us like a sword.
Yes.
And he said, we made damn sure that the next time we met, we delivered on the expectation.
Yeah.
And he said, I've used that so many times.
It's amazing the power that words have. And disappointment is we're not talking about disappointment today, but it is a very powerful word. And I remember, talking about it with you some time ago, and it being one of the most powerful words in your vocabulary, and it means the most to you. And I think that it was encouraging for me to know that and to be aware of that, because it isn't something that people necessarily will tell you. You hear these things, and it's a little bit like people don't tell you that you're not dependable. It's one of those sort of what I call a silent killer. It's just that you get shoved off to the side if you're not dependable, and maybe you'll never know why.
Yeah, and it's, again, I go back to the cultural climate. And last week I gave a statistic, and I'm going to keep giving it. And that is, it's based on a study that Mental Health America and my foundation has been working on for 4 years. It's called Mind the Workplace. And we have a lot of rich material from the now 3 surveys that we've done, now over 60,000 participants. And that statistic is 3/4, or 2/3 of North American workers cannot count on their coworker when they need support. And I can't keep re-emphasizing that statistic, because it reflects the society we're in. And because of that, there's 110,000 deaths annually, about the same number of people who have died of the coronavirus.
That's right.
Due to stress in the workplace. And that stress is caused by the fact that they cannot count on or depend on their co-workers. And we're now starting and going to be asked the question, can we count on our fellow citizens? Can we count on our family members? Can we count on, because things are going to get very, very ugly and bad for people out there. We have no idea the extent of it.
Yeah.
And other than it's going to get worse than it is right now.
Yeah.
And people will need the support and help and guidance. And they need to be able to have at least one person that they can go to and say, this person will help me in whatever form.
Yes.
And I just cannot overemphasize how people should view the role they play in that. The other is, and we found this through the work we've done with Mental Health America. It's one of the biggest reasons that we have this mental health, addiction, and loneliness crisis. And these are statistics pre-coronavirus.
Yes.
And I'd hate to think what those numbers are going to be.
Well, I notice, Andy, I notice a lot in just straight communications. And it doesn't matter whether it's in the newspaper or whether it's on social media or whether it's just talking to somebody. The ramifications of this isolation that we've been going through has profound effects. And they're not particularly positive in a lot of the cases. So it builds on this culture of fear that was present pre-coronavirus, and it causes people, I think, frankly, to be sort of more desperate for somebody to count on, yet less dependable themselves. So it's a double-edged sword that I think will benefit greatly from the self-reflection that you espouse.
Yeah, and again, like we talked about with courage, just self-reflection, must be based on real situations that people have gone through, and looking back, first at maybe looking at it and say, where have people let you down? And how do you feel about that person, and have you just accepted that, and how really important it was, and then look at it in terms of how you could have supported somebody and did not, and hopefully there wasn't a consequence to that. But the likelihood is that there was consequence, and it may have left an emotional scar. We often, all too often, and we'll get into this in our next week's session, in E is for emotional intelligence. And we don't understand how people react because people don't tell us.
Right.
And we need to be told what we need to hear.
Yes.
And that's where that fear factor comes in.
That's right. Yeah.
And the fear factor is fear of either rejection. So I go to EJ for some help, and you just say no, or it is retaliated. You're retaliated against.
Yeah.
On the basis of somehow you are a lesser person because because you need something from me. And again, it's we're living in a society where we have to accept we need each other.
Yeah.
But we also have to accept the flip side of that ethic of reciprocity. We need to help others.
That's right.
And we need to support others.
That's right.
And that, in my view, is the only way we're going to get out of this quagmire that we're in.
Yeah. Well, I think that is is a great way for people to really get a grip on what self-reflection really entails. Because, as you said, you have to use real life situations, when you're doing this self-reflection. So I think that is, that's a great way to segue into next week's show. And so thank you very much, Andy, for sharing your thoughts and comments on dependable, because it's a very important word. And thank you all for watching the show today. And we look forward to your comments and questions that you can leave on our Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn pages. And we look forward to seeing you next week when we'll be discussing E is for emotionally intelligent.
Following the Golden Rule with Andrew Faas is proudly supported by Remax St. Andrews. Live and vacation by the sea. Choose wisely. Choose Remax.